part of that plan, of course, is to induce the gradual surrender of American sovereignty, piece by piece and step by step, to various international organizations, of which the United Nations is the outstanding but far from the only example.
Now, the United Nations, as we know, is a successor to the League of Nations that was initiated after World War I in 1919 to promote international cooperation to achieve peace and security. It was during the Second World War on 1st of January 1942 that the name United Nations was first coined by Illuminist Franklin D. Roosevelt. 26 nations came together to pledge their commitment to continue fighting against the Axis powers of the day. 3 years later, in 1945, as the war was ending, representatives of 50 countries met in San Francisco at the United Nations Conference on International Organization to draw up the United Nations Charter. It was signed on 26th of June 1945 by all member countries, and then later by Poland, who became the 51st member state. The UN officially came into existence on 24th of October 1945, and every year on this date it is celebrated as United Nations Day. So what about this charter then? Well, it copied heavily from the original charter drawn up for the League of Nations. This original charter was heavily influenced by Arthur Balfour, who we have met already as the one who handed Israel over to the Rothschilds. The United Nations that followed used various elements of the League of Nations as a template. And the nature of those pioneers that followed wasn't much of an improvement on Balfour. The two men who were largely responsible for writing the UN Charter were Alger Hiss and Joseph E. Johnson. Alger Hiss was accused of being a Soviet spy, charged with espionage against the United States, and of being a member of the United States Communist Party. At his trial, he was found guilty of several counts of perjury and was imprisoned for the same. This was the man who became the first acting Secretary General of the United Nations. Joseph E. Johnson later became secretary of the Bilderberg Group, a secret Masonic society containing persons of influence in the fields of politics, banking, business, the military and media. Along with Hiss, Johnson patterned the UN Charter after the Constitution of Russia and the Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto was of course written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, those whose ideas can be traced back to Plato and the Kabbalah through the Enlightenment and French Revolution. As a result of these connections, the Constitution of the USSR is said to be almost identical to the Constitution of the UN. The first official Secretary General, in other words the first leader of the United Nations, was a man called Trygve Lie. He was a high-ranking official of Norway's Social Democratic Labour Party, which was an offshoot of the Third Communist International. Dag Hammarskjöld was the second Secretary General, and he was a Swedish socialist who openly pushed communist policies. The third Secretary General, U Thant, was a Marxist. You get the idea. U Thant openly stated, "World Federalists hold before us a vision of a unified mankind living in peace under a just world order. The heart of their program, a world under law, is realistic and attainable." This was backed up by most leaders of the day. Winston Churchill said, "The creation of an authoritative world order is the ultimate aim to which we must strive." Charles de Gaulle, the French president, said, "Nations must unite in a world government or perish."
Now here are the aims for the United States. 1. Greatly expanded government spending for every conceivable means of getting rid of ever larger sums of American money as wastefully as possible. 2. Higher and then much higher taxes. 3. An increasingly unbalanced budget despite the higher taxes. 4. Wild inflation of our currency. 5. Government controls of prices, wages, and materials, supposedly to combat inflation. 6. Greatly increased socialistic controls over every operation of our economy and every activity of our daily lives. This is to be accompanied naturally and automatically by a correspondingly huge increase in the size of our bureaucracy and in both the cost and reach of our domestic government. 7. Far more centralization of power in Washington and the practical elimination of our state lines. There is a many-faceted drive at work to have our state lines eventually mean no more within the nation than our county lines do now within the states. 8, the steady advance of federal aid to and control over our educational system, leading to complete federalization of our public education. 9, a constant hammering into the American consciousness of the horror of modern warfare, the beauties and the absolute necessity of peace. Peace always on communist terms, of course. And 10, the consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government, which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself.
Bernanke is the chairman of our central bank, the Federal Reserve. A central bank is one of the main reasons we revolted against England. Thomas Jefferson was even quoted saying, "A central bank is more menacing to the American people than a standing army." Bernanke has the power to and is responsible for inflating the currency, blowing up the real estate bubble, handing out trillions to Wall Street cronies, and along with Hank Paulson, bailed out AIG, Goldman Sachs, and Bank of America in 2008. Bernanke's current vision is to drive America into a hyperinflation depression in order to get rid of the middle class and leave us with a super rich and a super poor. Yet this man is not being brought to justice. While America is being destroyed by design, we are more concerned with our favorite sports team or the latest celebrity gossip than our very own country our forefathers conquered.
Recent weaker than expected economic performance appears to have been the result of several factors that are likely to be temporary. Notably, the run-up in prices of energy, especially gasoline and food, has reduced consumer purchasing power. I think with 9.2% unemployment, the economy still requires a good deal of support. The Federal Reserve is doing what we can to provide modernization. If we get to a point where we're like, the economy recovery is faltering and we're looking at inflation dropping down towards zero or something, where inflation issues are not relevant, then, we have to look at all the options. We certainly cannot continue on an unsustainable path. If we were to do so, in the long term, clearly we would have higher interest rates, less capital formation, more foreign borrowing, slower growth in the economy. You need to be a little bit cautious about sharp cuts in the very near term because of the impact on the potential impact on the recovery. We need both an increase in the debt limit, which will prevent us from defaulting on obligations which we have already incurred and which would create tremendous problems for our financial system and our economy. But we also need, of course, to take a serious attack on the unsustainability of our fiscal position. I think both of those things can be accomplished. If, in fact, we ended up defaulting on the debt, or even if we didn't, I think it's possible that simply defaulting on our obligations to our citizens might be enough to create a downgrade in credit ratings and a higher interest rate for us, which would be counterproductive, of course, since it makes the deficit worse. But clearly, if we went so far as to default on the debt, it would be a major crisis.
The last nail is being driven into the coffin of the American Republic.